No one orders me around.
Aye?
Tread lightly. What is it now? Finally. This is more like it. Ah, at last. Speak, fool. Frostmourne
Wait till you
hungers.
see me in action.
What is it now? No one orders me around. Finally. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. No one orders me around. Ah, at last. What is it now? Frostmourne hungers. Speak, fool. This is more like it. Ah, at last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. No one orders me around. What is it now? Ah, at last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Tread lightly. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Ah, at last. Finally. This is more like it. I'll make sure you suffer. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Ah, at last. Finally. Finally. Ah, at last. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. Tread lightly. Frostmourne hungers. Ah, at last. What is it? Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Speak. No one orders me around. No one orders me around. Ah, at last. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Ah, at last. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. For the Lich King. Ah, at last. Finally.
Our brethren's town is under attack.
Now, Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Ah, at last. Ah, at last. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Ah, at last. Finally. This is more like it. Ah, at last. Your pain. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Ah, at last. Tread lightly. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Ah, at last. Finally. This is more like it. This is more like it. Speak, fool. Frostmourne hungers. What is it now? Ah, at last. Faithless hungers. Finally. Ah, at last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Ah, at last. Ah, at last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Now, Frostmourne. Ah, at last. Finally. For the Lich King. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Ah, at last. This is more like it. No one orders me around. Finally. Speak, fool. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Ah, at last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Ah, at last. Ah, at last. Endless. What is it now? Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Tread lightly. This is more like it. This is more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. At last. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. Finally.
Your pain shall be legendary.
At last. This is more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. At last. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. Frostborn hungers.
Faithless coward.
This is more like it. Finally. What is it now? At last. At last.
More gold
Tread lightly. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers.
I'll make sure you suffer.
This is more like it. At last. Frostborn.
Our brethren's town is
No
under
one
attack.
orders me around. Finally. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last.
You will know endless torment.
Frostborn hungers. At last. Finally. This is
Speak.
Frostborn hungers.
Glory to the scourge.
This is more like it. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Finally. Frostborn hungers. At last. This is more like it. At last.
First blood.
Frostborn hungers. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. At last. What is it now? Tread lightly. Finally. At last. Frostborn hungers. Finally. This is more like it. At last. Finally. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it.
Your pain shall be legendary.
Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. At last. Finally. This is more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. Finally.
Our brethren's town is under
At
attack.
last. At last. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. Finally. No one orders me. Speak, fool. Finally. No one orders me around. This is more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. At last. Finally. Frostborn hungers. Finally. Now, Frostborn. This is more like it. For the Lich King. Frostborn waits. At last. Finally. Frostborn
Our
hungers.
brethren's town is under
This is
attack.
more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. Finally. What is it now? This is more like it. Tread lightly. Speak, fool.
Our
Speak.
brethren's town is under attack.
What is it now? At last.
What is it?
No one orders me around. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last. Tread lightly.
Our brethren's town is under attack.
Speak, fool. What is it? Tread lightly. Finally.
More word?
No one orders me around. Tread lightly. Speak, fool. Frostborn hungers. At last. No one orders me around. Finally. This is more like What is it now? What is it now? Finally. Tread lightly. At last. Speak, fool. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last. Finally. No one orders me around. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. This is more like it. Finally. Frostborn hungers. At last. Frostborn hungers. At last. Finally. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last. Finally. This is more like it. Faithless coward. This is more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. Frostborn hungers. Finally. This is more like it. At last. Finally. Tread lightly. No one orders me around. At last. This is more like it. Frostborn hunger. Speak. What is it now? Finally. Tread lightly. At last. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last.
Our brethren's town is under attack.
Frostborn hungers. At last. Speak, fool. No one orders me around. What is it now? Finally, no one orders me around. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last. You will end this. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Finally. Frostborn hungers. At last. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. At last. Speak. Frostborn hungers. Finally. This is more like it. Tread lightly. Frostborn hungers. At last. Tread lightly. This is more like it. At last. Finally. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Finally. At last. Frostborn hungers. At last. Finally. Speak, fool. Finally. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. No one.
Killing spree.
At last. Frostborn hungers. I'll make sure. At last. This is more like it. Faithless coward. Finally. At last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. What is it now? No one orders me around. Finally. Frostborn hungers. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. Finally. Your pain shall be legendary. For the Lich King. This is more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. At last. Finally. This is more like
Our brethren's town is under attack.
At last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Finally.
Dominating.
Speak, fool. At last. Frostborn hungers. Finally. This is more like it. Finally. At last. Now, Frostborn. For the Lich King. This is more like it. What is it now? Frostborn
Our
hungers.
forces are under attack.
At last. This is more like it. Now, Frostborn. Finally. Frostborn hungers. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Finally. At last. Frostborn hungers.
Faithless coward.
Frostborn. At last. This is finally. Frostborn hungers. No one orders me around. Tread lightly. This is more like it. What is it now? At last. Tread lightly. Speak, fool. No one orders me around. Tread lightly. Speak, fool. No one orders me around. Frostborn hungers. At last. What is it? This is more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. Finally. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Finally. What is it? Frostborn hungers. At last. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. No one orders me around. Finally. At last.
Our forces are under attack.
This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last. Tread lightly. At last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Finally. At last. Speak, fool. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers.
Our brethren's town is under attack.
Frostborn hungers. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. Finally. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last.
Killing spree. Double kill.
I wish only to serve. Our brethren's town is under attack.
Dominated. Own it.
close, my friend.
Hello.
My death awaits.
Unstoppable.
My death awaits.
Mega kill.
Our forces are under attack.
Unstoppable. Double kill.
Our brethren's town is under attack.
My death awaits.
Our brethren's town is under attack.
My death awaits.
I bow to your will.
Welcome to our village.